Do Graham Hancock's claims regarding the Piri Reis map hold water? That is what we're going to be looking at in this video. So the Piri Reis map, which is this map right here, is a map drawn by a man named Piri Reis from the Ottoman Empire back in the year 1513. And Graham Hancock claims that this map shows evidence of the existence of an ancient global seafaring civilization back during the last ice age that had advanced technology comparable or better than what we have today. This claim is not something that Hancock came up with himself. It dates back to the 1950s and is called the Hapgood hypothesis. Graham Hancock is just one of a number of people who have promoted it since, although he has his slight variation on it. So why does Hancock believe this map shows evidence of this advanced ancient civilization? Well, he points to four main features of this map that he believes demonstrate this. The first one is the provenance of the map. If we take a look at this map, we see that there's a lot of writing on it, a lot of text, and apart from the place names, a lot of this text is descriptions by Piri Reis of how he put this map together, what his sources were, and how various coasts were discovered, and other descriptions of the coast and who made them. And within these texts, Hancock claims that Piri Reis tells us somewhat indirectly that he used very ancient source maps, which Hancock claims some of them must have dated back to this ancient civilization or contained information that originated from this ancient civilization. The second feature he points to is the accuracy of the map. So Hancock claims that the longitude and latitude, in particular the longitude of the map, is far too accurate given the technology available in the 1500s. Therefore, Piri Reis must have had access to a map made by someone who lived in a more advanced civilization, and that must have been this civilization back from the last ice age. The third piece of evidence he points to is this southern landmass down here, which he claims to be Antarctica. But Antarctica had not been discovered yet in the year 1513. In fact, it would not be discovered officially for another 300 years or so. And Hancock adds, it doesn't just show up on this map, but it shows up as it was during the last ice age. So how could Antarctica, as it was during the last ice age, show up on a map in the 1500s? Piri Reis must have had a map that contained information from the last ice age. The final piece of evidence he points to is this island right here, which he claims to be the Grand Bahama Banks. Today, the Bahamas are a bunch of islands, but back during the last ice age, the entire Grand Bahama Banks was above water and was one large island. He also claims that this feature running along the island here is the Bimini Road. This is a rock structure that is underwater in the Bahamas that Hancock believes to be a man-made road from this ancient civilization, although he clarifies that whether these rocks are a man-made road or a natural formation is irrelevant to the argument. Even though he believes that they are man-made, it doesn't really matter because what's important is that they show up above water on this map, and the last time that happened was at the height of the last ice age. So those are the four main features he points to, and we're going to take a look at them one by one and see if his claims hold any water. Now I'm not going to do them all in this video because that would take too long. I'll probably do one video for each. Before we get into that, let's just take a quick overview of this map so we have an idea what we're dealing with. I should preface that I am not a historian or a cartographer or an archaeologist, so if I say anything that's inaccurate in this video, please let me know in the comments, especially if it pertains to the arguments I'm making. Given that I'm not an expert, all I'm really going to do in this video is read what the map says, and any information beyond that, I'm going to take from this book called The Piri Reis Map of 1513 by Gregory Mackintosh. If you're interested in the Piri Reis map, I recommend picking up this book. It examines in great detail every corner, every coastline, and every feature of this map, overviewing every single hypothesis and theory that people have come up with over the years, and giving arguments why some of them might be reasonable and others not, including the Hapgood hypothesis, which he covers in great detail. So, what can we say about this map? As I said, it was made in the year 1513 by a man named Piri Reis, who lived in the Ottoman Empire. Originally, this was a world map, but only this piece of the Atlantic survives. We know it was a world map because Piri Reis says so on the map. Now, this is what's called a Portolan style map, which means it's a map that shows lines of constant bearing, or rhumb lines. And that's what all these crisscrossing black and red lines emanating from these circles are. These are lines of constant bearing so that navigators can know which direction they have to sail if they want to go from one place to another. These type of maps were very popular in the Middle Ages and around the time this map was made. Now notice something here. These compass roses, or these wind roses from which these rhumb lines are emanating, form a pattern in an arc shape from alternating small to large, small to large, small to large. And if you extrapolate this curve to a circle, you can infer what the entire map might have looked like. And in the book, that's exactly what Mackintosh does. He surmises the map must have looked something like this, where we have these compass roses in a circle, and the next obvious question is, well, what's at the center of the circle? The longitude it's lined up with goes through the peninsula of Gallipoli, and that's where Piri Reis is from. So that makes sense. And the latitude appears to be lined up with the Tropic of Cancer. So that's interesting because most maps we're accustomed to are lined up on the equator, but this one's lined up on the Tropic of Cancer. And this compass rose here is on the map, or the part that's left of the map, and is right here. So this is apparently lined up with the Tropic of Cancer, at least relative to the Americas, relative to Africa. Relative to the Americas, it's not so clear because this part of the map doesn't look anything like North America. This compass rose here appears to be lined up with the equator, and this one with the Tropic of Capricorn, at least relative to Africa. It's a little bit off relative to Brazil. Now, you might have noticed on this hypothetical full map that we have this southern continent extending and wrapping around the entire Earth and connecting to Asia. So why would that be? Well, the reason in the book he thinks this might be what it looked like is that a number of maps at the time and prior to this map had this wrapping around southern continent that connected the entire world. For example, we have the Miller Atlas here that has this southern continent, very similar to what's shown here. This map was drawn a little bit later than the Piri Reis map by a Portuguese man named Lopo Homem, which means wolf man. And in the book, Mackintosh surmises that it's quite likely that Piri Reis and Lopo Homem used a common source to make these two maps. The reason for this, we'll find out later on in this video. Okay, now that we have a basic idea of what we're looking at here, let's get into Graham Hancock's claims. The first one being the provenance of the map, the source maps used by Piri Reis to put this map together. Now, I don't want to misrepresent Graham Hancock, so let's let him speak for himself, and we're going to watch a couple clips and see what he has to say. While you're watching these clips, if you're enjoying this video so far, please like and subscribe.
Piri Reis explains why in these texts that he wrote on the map. He was a Turkish admiral and he wrote these texts on the map. And what they say is that the map is not his own work. It's a work of synthesis. It's based on more than 20 earlier source maps, that he put all these maps together and derived his own map from these. And unfortunately, the source maps that Piri Reis used have not survived. Is it possible that the advanced features of this map originate in those lost source maps, which Piri Reis told us went back in some cases to before the time of Christ and had come from the long-lost library of Alexandria in Egypt?
Okay, so the basic claim is that Piri Reis tells us that he used 20 source maps, some of which originated from the Library of Alexandria. And the idea is that the reason this map looks the way it does is that some of those maps from the Library of Alexandria dated back or had information dating back from the last ice age. But since then, he's been on Joe Rogan a few times, and a number of times he's talked about the Piri Reis map. So let's see what he said on Joe Rogan.
Piri Reis writes in that map that it is in his own handwriting that he based it on more than 100 older source maps.
All right, already the 20 source maps has jumped to 100 or over 100 source maps. Now, this might just be a slip of the tongue or a brain fart or just an innocent mistake, but he's quite emphatic about the 100 source maps, and I'm a little hesitant to give him the benefit of the doubt because I've noticed that Hancock tends to exaggerate claims in his favor, especially when he's getting a little frustrated that nobody's believing him. In fact, you're going to see that later on in this clip, he kind of does it again.
Some of which had come from the Library of Alexandria. In other words, that maps had been, when the Library of Alexandria had been destroyed in the 4th century AD or whenever it was, some of its contents had been rescued and brought to Constantinople, which became the Turkish capital.
Okay, so this might not be that important, but here he says that the Library of Alexandria burned down in the 4th century or whenever it was. Well, the Library of Alexandria burned down in the 1st century BC. And one thing Hancock tends to do is that when there is evidence that doesn't really fit with his theory, he tends to present it in a sort of hand-wavy, oh, it doesn't really matter fashion, like he did here. The Library of Alexandria burned in the 4th century AD or whenever it was. But he's claiming that when the Library of Alexandria burned, some of its contents were rescued and brought to Constantinople. The problem is, when the Library of Alexandria burned in the 1st century BC, Constantinople wasn't really a city. I mean, there was a settlement there, and prior to the 4th century, when it became the Roman capital, it was called Byzantium, but it was not a major city. It was not a place you would bring precious copies from a library. In fact, from my understanding, between the time that the Library of Alexandria burned and the 4th century AD, the city of Byzantium, which became Constantinople, had been destroyed a few times due to warfare. Now, this doesn't mean that what he's claiming is impossible. The Library of Alexandria, even though it burned in the 1st century BC, it didn't completely burn down. It continued to be used for centuries after that, and we don't really know how much of the contents were lost. So what he's saying is not completely impossible, but he's kind of twisting the facts by saying it burned down in the 4th century AD when Constantinople became a major city, when in fact it burned down in the 1st century BC. There's a 500-year gap or so between the two. Let's continue the clip.
Reis had access to those maps, and he incorporated information from those maps on his maps, as well as incorporating more recent navigational information.
Okay, so the basic idea, the basic claim is the same in both clips. He's claiming that Piri Reis had maps from the Library of Alexandria, and that possibly in those maps contained some information from this ancient civilization back during the last ice age. But unfortunately, those maps are now lost. Well, because he says this is written in Piri Reis's own handwriting on the map, let's just read the map and see if that matches what Hancock claims. Now, there's actually a few places on this map in which Piri Reis tells us about the sources he used. The first one we're going to take a look at is this large text right here. This is actually a text describing how Columbus discovered America. In this text, and in a couple other places on this map, he mentions Columbus, and he's very praiseworthy of Columbus. This will be important when we get to the Bimini Road. Let's check out what he says. I'm going to use this translation, which is off of Wikipedia. Unfortunately, this translation does not have every single text on the map. In particular, most of the place names are not on here. So when we're going to need to look at place names, I'll have to refer to the book. But most of the large texts are on here, and this large text here is the text referring to Columbus. I'm not going to read this whole thing. It's kind of an interesting read. It reads a little bit like a kid's story in which Columbus goes from one government to another trying to get funding for his trip until he finally gets it from Spain. And then when he lands in the Americas, Piri Reis doesn't call them the Americas, but when he lands there, he first lands at one island and the people there are hostile. They shoot arrows at him, so he has to escape, and he goes to a second island where he discovers that the locals have human flesh in their boats and realizes, oh my god, these are cannibals, we better get out of here. So they escape and go to a third island, and on the third island the people are friendly and they trade with him using signs. So it's kind of like a Goldilocks and the Three Bears type thing. He goes to 3 different islands, there's a problem on each island, and on the third one things go well. Kind of like with the porridge and the beds. Now, at the end of this text, he says something interesting. I'm just going to read this last part. He says, "Now these regions have been opened to all and have become famous. The names which mark the places on the said islands and coasts were given by Colombo," that's Columbus, "that these places may be known to them." Okay, so he's telling us here that these regions were discovered by Columbus. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. He's not saying, I got this from an old map. He's saying Columbus discovered this place. And also, Colombo was a great astronomer. All right? Very praiseworthy of Columbus. The coasts and islands on this map are taken from Colombo's map. And the translation is Axura in 1935. This translation is also referenced in the book. this is a very interesting sentence here. First, he's saying that he has a map from Columbus. We don't have any of Columbus's maps today. So if that's true, this map is the closest thing we have to a map drawn by Columbus. The other thing he says is that the coast and islands on this map are taken from Columbus's map. Well, which coast and islands? Kind of sounds like he's saying all of them are, but we know that's not possible. Columbus didn't travel all down South America. He only traveled basically around the Caribbean. So only this part around the Caribbean, which would correspond to roughly this area, must come from Columbus's map, if in fact it is true that he had one of Columbus's map. Well, in the book, Mackintosh argues that actually he probably did have one of Columbus's maps, and the reason he says this is that the place names and the description of this general area match descriptions made by Columbus and place names that only Columbus used. So for example, on this island, there's a settlement called La Navidad, or something similar, and that is the name of the first settlement built by Columbus on his first voyage. When he came back on his second voyage, that settlement had been destroyed by the local population. So this would only show up on one of his maps. There are also some other place names on here that he used that were later changed, and this part of the map fits the general description Columbus gave in other writings, which I believe we have today, of the lands he discovered, which he believed was Asia. Now, the question is, where does this map end? Well, in the book, he argues that the map that Piri Reis got from Columbus must have ended somewhere along here. There must be a cut right here where we're joining two maps between this red rum line and this black one. Why does he say that? For a couple reasons. First, the place names down here don't match place names that Columbus would have used. They have names that date to after Columbus's voyages, so they would not have shown up on a Columbus map. The other thing is that the Virgin Islands show up twice on this map. So this island can be identified with Puerto Rico, and next to Puerto Rico we have the Virgin Islands. But then this set of islands here is also the Virgin Islands because it says so right here. They're called the 11 Virgins. So probably what happened, according to Mackintosh, is that he had two maps and he didn't realize that both of these islands were the same set of islands. So he included both of them, thinking they were different groups of islands, but in fact they were both the Virgin Islands. So he must have joined his map somewhere along here. So that's pretty cool. We actually have good reason to believe that Piri Reis actually used a map made by Columbus. Okay, but that's not really the claim being made by Hancock. Hancock claims we have maps from the Library of Alexandria, and that part of the claim shows up in this text right here. So let's read what it says. Let me expand this so that we can see the whole thing. This section shows in what way this map was drawn. In this century, there is no map like this map in anyone's possession. Going down to the next paragraph here, the hand of this poor man has drawn it, and now it is completed. From about 20 charts and Mappe Mundi. Mappe Mundi are maps made by Europeans in the Middle Ages. And you know what? I'm just going to read the whole thing, and then we'll take this one sentence at a time. So, from about 20 charts in Mappe Mundi, these are charts drawn in the days of Alexander, Lord of Two Horns. That's Alexander the Great. The Arabs represented him with two horns, which show the inhabited quarter of the world. The Arabs named these charts Jaferiye. From 8 Jaferiyas of that kind and one Arabic map of Hind, that's India, and from the maps just drawn by 4 Portuguese, which show the countries of Hind, Sind, that's Pakistan, and China geometrically drawn, and also from a map drawn by Colombo, we've already discussed that one, in the western region I have extracted it. By reducing all these maps to one scale, this final form was arrived at, so that the present map is as correct and reliable for the 7 seas as the map of our countries is considered correct and reliable by seamen. Okay, there's a lot of information here, so let's take this one sentence at a time. First, he tells us, from about 20 charts and Mappe Mundi. Okay, so that's the correct figure. He used 20 source maps, not 100, 20. So 20 charts and Mappe Mundi. Well, what are Mappe Mundi? Mappe Mundi are maps made by Europeans in the Middle Ages that tend to look like this. They have this general layout of a circle with this sort of T-shaped outline of the Earth. And they're very difficult to read. If these are meant for navigation, I don't know how anyone could follow them. In fact, if you can figure out what this map is depicting, hats off to you. And I'm actually going to pause the video here, or just take a second to let you pause the video and see if you can figure out what is what on this map. Okay, did you figure it out? Well, let me tell you. This, it turns out, is the Red Sea. This is the Nile, which would make this the Mediterranean. Over here we have the Aegean. Here we have the Adriatic, which would make this Italy. And this is the Strait of Gibraltar. And these islands over here are the British Isles. If you were able to figure that out, I'm impressed. Now, just to show you that this is not some abnormality of a really bad map, then that they actually kind of all look like this, let's just take a look at a few other ones. So here's another one, also quite difficult to make out, but now you can kind of probably guess what it is. Here we have the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. Let's take a look at one more. So here's another one, same general outline, and same difficulty in deciphering it. And we have one that's a little bit easier to figure out. Here we can clearly see we have Europe. It's upside down compared to what we're accustomed to. North would be like this way, down here. So this is the boot of Italy. Here we have Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula, Greece. So this is the Mediterranean, and this is Africa. And then all this is Asia. This is probably the Caspian Sea right here. Okay, so those are Mappe Mundi. All right, these are charts made by Europeans in the Middle Ages. And he says, these are charts drawn in the days of Alexander, Lord of the Two Horns. Okay, that's Alexander the Great. So this is what Graham Hancock is referring to, but it does not say that he got the maps from the Library of Alexandria. That seems to be an embellishment by Hancock. What it says is, these are charts made in the days of Alexander the Great. They date back to Alexander. He didn't get them from the Library of Alexandria. I mean, maybe they were in the Library of Alexandria, but it doesn't actually say that. But let's continue. These are charts drawn in the days of Alexander, Lord of Two Horns, which show the inhabited quarter of the world. Well, what does that mean, the inhabited quarter of the world? Isn't the whole world inhabited, except for maybe Antarctica? Well, it turns out there's a term in Greek, which is ekumenē, and this refers to, in ancient Greece, the term ekumenē, which means the inhabited world, denoted the known inhabited or habitable world. In Greek antiquity, it referred to the portions of the world known to Hellenic geographers, subdivided into 3 continents: Africa, Europe, and Asia. Oh my. Oh no. Oh, Graham. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. Graham, how could you be so blatantly dishonest? I hope you caught what just happened here. Remember what Graham Hancock's claim is. He's claiming that some of these maps that date back to the time of Alexander, or the Library of Alexandria, whichever one you want to interpret it as, are the explanation as to why this map has such curious and advanced features. But in the text, he specifically says that the maps associated with Alexander the Great only show the inhabited quarter of the world. They only show the old world. They do not depict the Americas. It specifically states that. So at best, it could explain this piece of Africa and this piece of Europe. And nobody really cares about this. This is not what makes the map interesting. The Americas is what makes this map interesting. So, I mean, do I even need to go any further? He's blatantly misrepresenting what's going on here by omitting the second half of this sentence. His theory is dead in the water. Unfortunately, this isn't the end. It gets worse. So let's continue reading. So, Alexander, Lord of Two Horns, which show the inhabited quarter of the world. The Arabs name these charts Jaferiye. Alright, Jaferiye is an Arabic garbling of the word geography or geographia in Greek. And it refers to Claudius Ptolemy's book, the Geography, or the Geographies. And I guess it is well known by historians that the Arabs confused Claudius Ptolemy with the Ptolemaic Empire. Claudius Ptolemy, lived in the Roman Empire in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. The Ptolemaic Empire was a Greek kingdom in Egypt, founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals, Ptolemy, hence the name Ptolemaic Empire. So the Arabs, when finding these charts by Claudius Ptolemy, confused that with the Ptolemaic Empire because they have the same name. But there isn't really any connection between the two, and they're actually separated by a few hundred years, and they don't even live in the same empire, although they do both live in modern-day Egypt. So that is why this chart claims they date back to Alexander the Great. They don't date back to Alexander the Great. They come from Ptolemy's chart, or Ptolemy's book, The Geography, which actually is right here. This is one of Ptolemy's maps, or a recreation of it. And one thing we can see here is that we have this southern landmass wrapping around the world, connecting Africa to Asia. Now, in the time of Piri Reis, it's known that you can circumnavigate Africa. So, if in fact this is what his map looked like, instead of connecting Asia to Africa, he would wrap it around Africa and connect it to the New World, to the Americas, as did Lopo Omim in this map. So, Claudius Ptolemy, not the Ptolemaic Empire, not Alexander the Great. Now, one thing I should point out about this map is that it's written in Turkish, and Turkish from the 1500s, which at the time used the Arabic alphabet. Today, Turkish is written with the Latin alphabet. So basically, very few people can actually read what this map says. This works to Hancock's advantage. He can kind of say whatever he wants about what is written on this map, and knows that basically no one can really check it that easily. They're going to have to do some work to go verify it. So probably most people are just going to take his word on it. And in fact, he grossly misrepresents. I mean, he lies about what's on this map. There's no other way to put it. He's claiming the map comes from the Library of Alexandria, and that's why the map looks the way it does, when the part that's associated to Alexander the Great, Piri Reis tells us in his own handwriting that it does not include the Americas, only the Old World, the inhabited world. Now, we've pretty much killed this claim that Piri Reis tells us that the source maps dated to the Library of Alexandria, and that's why the map looks the way it does, but there's actually more. Down here, we have more information of where he got his maps from, so let's read those. So here we have, it is related by the Portuguese infidel that on the spot night and day are at their shortest period of 2-hour duration and at their longest phase of 22 hours. That seems like it might match with Antarctica, so that's interesting. But the day is warm and in the night there is much dew. Even though this might match with Antarctica, we'll take a look at that when we discuss the Antarctica claim. What this clearly tells us is that he got this part of the map from the Portuguese, not from the Library of Alexandria, not from some ancient civilization, unless you believe this ancient civilization is the Portuguese. Continuing to this text, on the way to the Shire of Hind, which is India, a Portuguese ship encountered a contrary wind. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is telling the story of how the Portuguese discovered Brazil. And it's not referring to this part of the map, it's actually referring to this text right here that says, this is the barca, the boat, from Portugal, which encountered a storm and came to this land. The details are written on the edge of this map. So he's telling you, go read this part here to get the story of how this was discovered. This is Rio de Janeiro here. So this is how Brazil was discovered by the Portuguese. But one thing that's interesting in this text, if we read towards the end, he says, they describe these shores in details. They discovered them, or they have discovered them. That's interesting. He's saying right there, this was discovered by the Portuguese. Now in the book, he gives actually a different translation to this last sentence. He says, they describe these coasts in detail, and from these it is copied. He doesn't say they have discovered them, he says, from these it is copied. So he's saying, this part is copied from a Portuguese map. Brazil is. All right, let's continue down the coast. Here we have, and in this country it seems that there are white-haired monsters in this shape and also 6-horned oxen. The Portuguese infidels have written it in their maps. This part of the coast he's getting from the Portuguese, not from Alexandria. This country is barren. Everything is in ruins, and it is said that the large snakes are found here. For this reason, the Portuguese infidels did not land on these shores, and these are also said to be very hot. Again, he's getting this part of the map from the Portuguese. And that's the very tip of this. This entire southern continent, he's saying he gets from Portuguese maps. So even if you're buying this story that he's got maps from Alexandria or the Library of Alexandria, I mean, he tells you, we didn't map the New World with it, and the New World was mapped by Portuguese maps. I mean, how many nails in the coffin do you need? The source maps cannot be used as evidence for this ancient civilization. Having said that, it does appear that Antarctica shows up on here, and what is going on up here, and maybe it's true that this coastline is too accurate for the technology at the time. So even though Hancock has lied his ass off in this first part, we're going to keep an open mind and see if maybe his other claims do hold water. In the next video, that's what we're going to be looking at. If you'd like to see that analysis, be sure to like and subscribe, hit the bell to be notified for when that video comes out, and hopefully I'll see you in the follow-up.